He thought speaking Korean would make her feel small, but the moment Selena Brooks answered him fluently, the entire restaurant forgot how to breathe. The private dining room on the 42nd floor of Hanseo Tower glowed with amber light and quiet wealth. Crystal glasses catching reflections from the Manhattan skyline, while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers above the marble walls. Every chair around the long black table belonged to someone powerful: hedge fund executives, luxury developers, political donors, men who wore watches worth more than most American homes. And at the center of them all sat Adrian Volkov, the Korean Mafia boss no one in New York dared to disrespect twice. His charcoal suit looked custom-stitched into his frame, sharp enough to cut glass, and the silver ring on his hand flashed each time he lifted his bourbon. People feared Adrian because he never raised his voice. He didn't need to. Silence obeyed him faster than threats ever could. Selena Brooks moved carefully between the tables with a tray balanced against one palm, her black uniform crisp despite the 14-hour shift already pulling at her shoulders. She kept her eyes lowered the way upscale restaurants trained people like her to do. Invisible, efficient, replaceable. That was how rich men prefer their servers. Especially men like Adrian Volkov. Another pour, one executive muttered without even looking at her. Selena nodded softly and reached for the bottle of 18-year scotch near Adrian's hand. That was when he spoke in Korean, his voice smooth and deliberate, knowing none of the Americans at the table would understand him. It's always amusing when places like this pretend elegance can be taught to anyone. A few Korean businessmen chuckled quietly. Adrian leaned back in his chair, watching Selena with cold amusement before adding another sentence in flawless Seoul dialect. She probably memorized the menu phonetically this morning. More laughter. Low. Controlled. The kind rich people used when they want a humiliation to feel sophisticated. Selena's hand tightened slightly around the bottle, almost invisible unless someone was truly watching her. Adrian noticed. His dark eyes sharpened with interest. Most people froze around him. Some trembled. Others overcompensated with fake confidence. But this woman only became still. The city lights reflected against the deep brown of her skin as she finished pouring the drink without spilling a drop. Then, very calmly, Selena lifted her eyes for the first time that night. "Actually, sir," she replied in perfect Korean, her pronunciation precise and elegant. The word you use for elegance carries a historical implication of inherited class superiority. In modern Seoul, that expression usually makes the speaker sound insecure. The air vanished from the room. One man nearly dropped his glass. Another stared at her so hard his mouth remained slightly open. Adrian didn't move at first. He simply looked at her, really looked at her now, as if the waitress standing beside him had suddenly become someone else entirely. Selena placed the scotch bottle gently onto the table. "Would you still like another pour, Mr. Volkov?" she asked in the same flawless language. No one laughed this time. The jazz continued somewhere in the distance, soft and meaningless against the silence crushing the room. Adrian's fingers stopped against his glass. For the first time that evening, the Korean Mafia boss looked caught off guard. And, somehow, that was far more dangerous than anger. The silence stretched so long that even the waitstaff near the kitchen entrance stopped moving. Selena Brooks stood beside the table with calm shoulders and steady eyes, while 12 powerful men stared at her like she had suddenly stepped out of another world. Adrian Volkov slowly lifted his bourbon glass, though he did not drink from it. His attention remained locked on her face with dangerous precision. Most people spent years trying to impress him. Others spent entire meetings terrified of saying the wrong word around him. But this woman had corrected him publicly without raising her voice once. One of the Korean investors cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your accent," he said carefully in Korean. "Where did you study?" Selena shifted her attention toward him with polite professionalism. "My mother taught comparative linguistics at Columbia University before she passed away," she answered. "I spent part of my childhood around visiting scholars from Seoul." The explanation sounded simple, but something about it did not satisfy Adrian. He had spent enough years around liars to recognize when a truth had been edited. Selena's Korean did not sound academic. It sounded lived in, natural, refined, like someone who had survived inside the culture rather than merely studied it. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, the city lights catching the sharp lines of his expression. Interesting, he said quietly in English this time. Most Americans who study Korean sound rehearsed. Selena offered a small professional smile. Most Americans do not spend years being corrected by strict grandmothers in Busan, sir. A few people around the table laughed nervously, unsure whether they were allowed to anymore. Adrian did not laugh. His eyes narrowed almost invisibly. Busan, not Seoul. That detail mattered. The room began breathing again, but the energy had changed completely. Earlier, Selena had been part of the background, another invisible server moving through polished wealth and expensive conversations. Now every person at the table tracked her movements unconsciously. The executive nearest Adrian suddenly adjusted his tie before speaking, as though embarrassed by how quickly he had laughed at her moments earlier. Selena continued serving drinks with the same calm efficiency as before, but Adrian noticed small details now. The precise posture, the controlled pacing, the complete absence of panic. Even after challenging one of the most feared men in New York, her hands remained perfectly steady. That unsettled him more than arrogance ever could. "What is your name again?" Adrian asked. "Selena Brooks, sir." "And how long have you worked here?" "Selena Brooks?" 8 months. Adrian studied her for another long moment before switching abruptly back into Korean. "You understand this dialect too?" he asked, this time using a sharper regional phrasing common among older businessmen from the South. Selena answered immediately without hesitation. "Yes, sir." Then, with almost invisible restraint, she added, though your pronunciation shifted halfway through the sentence. "You learned part of it abroad." The investor beside Adrian nearly choked on his drink. Another man looked down at the table to hide his reaction. Adrian finally smiled, but there was no warmth in it. It was the expression of a man realizing a game had become interesting. "You analyze people quickly," he observed. "Only when they underestimate me first," Selena replied softly. The room went silent again. Somewhere below the 42nd floor, Manhattan traffic moved through the rain-soaked streets, horns echoing faintly against the glass skyline. But inside that private dining room, nobody seemed interested in the business meeting anymore. Because for the first time that night, Adrian Volkov was no longer controlling the conversation, and everyone at the table knew it. By the time dessert arrived, nobody in the private dining room treated Selena Brooks like part of the staff anymore. Conversations had become careful around her, measured in a way powerful people only became when they realized they might not be the smartest person in the room. Selena moved quietly between crystal glasses and silver cutlery, while warm rain streaked across the floor to ceiling windows behind her, Manhattan glowing gold and blurred beneath the storm. Adrian Volkov watched her the entire time. Not openly. Men like him rarely stared. But every few minutes his attention returned to her, with the same cold precision a chess player used studying an unexpected move. It bothered him that he could not place her. He had built an empire by understanding people within seconds. Fear, greed, ambition, weakness. Everyone revealed themselves eventually. Yet Selena Brooks remained impossible to read. One of the younger investors finally broke the tension with an awkward laugh. "You should have become a translator instead of working here." Selena set down a plate gently before answering. Sometimes life chooses survival before passion. Her tone stayed polite, but the words carried weight heavier than anyone expected. Adrian noticed the way her eyes shifted briefly toward the rain outside after she spoke, as though part of her had disappeared somewhere far from New York long ago. "Where exactly did you learn all those languages?" another man asked. Selena hesitated for half a second. Tiny, almost invisible, but Adrian caught it immediately. "My mother traveled often for academic conferences," she replied carefully. "I grew up around international students, diplomats, professors." "Diplomats?" one executive repeated with surprise. Selena gave a small nod. "Language was important in our house." Adrian slowly rolled his bourbon glass between his fingers. Language is never just language, he said quietly. Selena finally looked directly at him again. No, sir, she answered. Usually it is power pretending to sound civilized. The room froze once more. One of the Korean businessmen lowered his eyes into his drink to hide a smile. Adrian should have been irritated. Instead, something far more dangerous settled into his expression. Curiosity. Real curiosity. He switched suddenly into Japanese, testing her without warning. How many languages do you actually speak? Selena answered in the same language without missing a beat. Enough to know when someone is trying to embarrass another person. A low cough escaped someone near the end of the table. Adrian leaned back slowly, studying her like a puzzle becoming more expensive by the minute. You enjoy challenging people more powerful than you? He asked in English again. Selena shook her head softly. No, sir. I just do not enjoy pretending to be smaller than I am. The words landed harder than anyone expected, especially Adrian, because beneath the calm professionalism and controlled posture, he recognized something familiar in her now. Pride. Not arrogance. Not ego. Something quieter. Stronger. The kind built from surviving humiliation without letting it poison you. Outside the private room, another waitress hurried past carrying champagne, but Selena remained completely still beneath Adrian's gaze. Neither of them seemed aware anymore that the rest of the table had stopped participating in the dinner. The business meeting had disappeared beneath a psychological duel neither side fully understood yet. Adrian's phone vibrated once against the table. He ignored it. That alone startled his associates. Nothing interrupted Adrian Volkov during negotiations. Nothing except this woman, apparently. Selena reached for the empty bourbon glass near his hand. As she lifted it carefully, Adrian spoke again, this time in low Korean meant only for her. You are hiding something. Selena paused for the first time all night. Then she answered just as quietly. Everyone in this room is. Adrian's fingers stopped moving against the table. And somewhere deep beneath the polished control of the Korean Mafia Boss, instinct began whispering that Selena Brooks was far more dangerous than she appeared. The dinner should have ended an hour earlier, but nobody around Adrian Volkov seemed willing to leave the table anymore. Rain rolled steadily down the glass walls of the private dining room, while Manhattan flickered beneath the storm like a city trapped underwater. Expensive candles burned lower beside untouched dessert plates, and the air carried that strange tension that appeared when intelligent people realized they were no longer the smartest voices in the room. Selena Brooks stood near the wine station organizing crystal glasses with calm precision, though she could feel Adrian's attention following her every movement. Most men stared at women because they wanted something. Adrian watched people because he wanted answers. That difference mattered. Miss Brooks, he said suddenly. His voice cut through the room without effort. Selena turned immediately. Yes, sir. Adrian rested one arm against the leather chair beside him. Come here for a moment. Several executives exchanged quick glances. Nobody spoke. Selena approached the table slowly, black heels soft against the marble floor. Up close, Adrian noticed details he had missed earlier. The faint scar near her wrist. The exhaustion hidden beneath professional posture. The way her eyes scanned exits automatically before settling back on him. Not fear. Habit. Tell me something, Adrian said, switching into smooth Japanese without warning. How does a waitress from Brooklyn end up speaking Korean better than half the businessmen in this city? Selena answered him in flawless Japanese, usually by disappointing people who expected less from her. One of the investors let out a stunned laugh before quickly covering his mouth. Adrian's expression did not change, but his interest sharpened visibly. Without pausing, he shifted languages again, this time Mandarin, his pronunciation cold and deliberate. And where did you learn this one? Selena responded instantly in Mandarin as well. Queens public libraries. Secondhand textbooks. Elderly neighbors who liked correcting my tones. Adrian leaned back slightly. You expect me to believe that? Selena folded her hands calmly in front of her apron. No, sir. I expect you to believe whatever makes you comfortable. Silence crashed over the table again. One executive stared openly now, no longer pretending not to listen. Another reached for his whiskey with unsteady fingers. Adrian's jaw tightened almost invisibly. She was doing something dangerous. Not insulting him. Worse, matching him. Most people reacted emotionally around power. Selena reacted intelligently. That unsettled him in ways anger never could. Adrian switched once more, this time into a sharper Korean dialect rarely spoken outside older criminal circles in Busan. A test. Deliberate. Precise. You understand this too? He asked quietly. Selena's expression changed for the first time all night. Not fear. Recognition. Very small. Very fast. But Adrian caught it immediately. Enough to know your grandfather probably spoke it first, she answered in the same dialect. The room went completely still. Adrian's fingers stopped against the table. Nobody outside certain Korean families even recognized that regional phrasing anymore. Yet she not only understood it, she understood where it came from. Adrian stared at her for several long seconds, his dark eyes colder now, more focused. Who exactly are you? He asked softly. Selena met his gaze without flinching. Tonight, she replied, just the woman refilling your glass. Then she reached forward, poured more bourbon into his crystal tumbler with perfectly steady hands, and stepped back again. One of the businessmen finally whispered under his breath, "This is insane." Adrian ignored him completely. His attention never left Selena, because somewhere beneath the polished calm of that quiet waitress, he had just caught a glimpse of something impossible. She did not merely know languages. She understood power. And people like Adrian Volkov knew better than anyone that understanding power was far more dangerous than speaking words. Adrian Volkov had spent most of his life watching people reveal themselves through insecurity. Wealthy men flaunted expensive watches because they feared irrelevance. Politicians raised their voices because silence exposed weakness. Even dangerous men eventually reached for intimidation when intelligence failed them. But Selena Brooks did something Adrian had almost never encountered before. She stayed calm. That calmness followed him long after the meeting should have ended. The private dining room had thinned out slowly over the last hour, investors leaving beneath umbrellas while staff cleared crystal glasses from the marble tables. Midnight approached quietly beyond the rain-covered skyline, Manhattan glowing silver beneath low clouds. Adrian remained seated near the window with one untouched bourbon resting beside his hand. He rarely drank enough to dull his instincts. Tonight his instincts refused to settle. Across the room, Selena folded linen napkins beside the service station with the same composed movements she had maintained all evening. No excitement, no pride, no nervousness after publicly matching him language for language in front of men who feared him. That disturbed Adrian more than if she had openly challenged him, because people who understood their own value rarely needed attention from anyone. You embarrassed him tonight, one younger waitress whispered quietly beside Selena near the kitchen entrance. Selena barely looked up. No, she answered softly. He embarrassed himself. Adrian heard every word. The younger waitress quickly rushed away after realizing he was still there, but Selena continued organizing silverware without reacting. Adrian watched her for another long moment before finally standing. The room shifted instantly when he moved. It always did. Even the restaurant manager straightened his posture from across the hall. Adrian walked slowly toward the service station, expensive dress, shoes silent against the polished floor. Selena sensed him approaching before she looked up. "Mr. Volkov," she said calmly. Adrian stopped only a few feet away. Up close, the exhaustion beneath her eyes showed more clearly now. Not weakness, weariness. The kind carried by people who had fought private battles for too long without help. "You enjoy making powerful men uncomfortable?" he asked. Selena placed another folded napkin neatly onto the stack before answering. "Only when they confuse power with superiority." Adrian studied her carefully. "There's a difference." Selena finally met his gaze fully again. A very large one. The rain intensified against the windows behind them, soft thunder rolling somewhere above the city. Adrian crossed his arms slowly. Most people in your position would have apologized by now. Selena gave a faint smile. Most people in my position spend their lives apologizing for existing. Adrian said nothing, because for one brief moment, something inside those words reached further than he expected. He remembered his grandfather arriving in America with almost nothing, mocked for his accent, treated like a servant by men who later begged for his help. Adrian had built his empire partly from that inherited humiliation. Power meant never being looked down on again. Yet somewhere along the way, he had started doing exactly what had once been done to his own family. Selena turned slightly toward the dark city outside the glass. "You know what the strange thing about languages is?" she asked quietly. Adrian remained still. "People think speaking multiple languages makes someone intelligent," she continued. "But sometimes it only teaches you how many different ways human beings can disrespect each other." The words settled heavily between them. No performance, no anger, just truth spoken too calmly to ignore. Adrian looked at her differently then, not as entertainment, not as a waitress with unusual skills. For the first time that night, he looked at Selena Brooks as someone who understood the same. Loneliness power created, and somehow, that realization unsettled him more than anything she had said all evening. The storm outside had turned the entire city silver by the time the second group of guests arrived on the 42nd floor. Expensive black SUVs lined the curb below Hansio Tower, while security teams moved quietly through the restaurant entrance with discreet earpieces and dark tailored coats. Selena Brooks noticed the shift immediately from behind the service counter. The atmosphere had changed from luxury dining to something colder, sharper. Important people were arriving now. Dangerous people. Adrian Volkov stood near the private conference area, speaking quietly with one of his associates, his posture calm but alert beneath the soft gold lighting. Even from across the room, Selena could feel the tension surrounding him like invisible electricity. The restaurant manager hurried toward the staff station, face pale. "Nobody enters the East Room unless specifically requested," he whispered nervously. "No mistakes tonight." Selena nodded once and continued arranging glasses, though instinct told her something larger was unfolding. Moments later, 4 Korean businessmen entered the private room, accompanied by a translator carrying a leather portfolio against his chest. Older men, expensive suits, controlled expressions, the kind of people who smiled without warmth. Adrian greeted them in Korean with smooth professionalism before gesturing toward the long marble table prepared near the windows. Selena moved carefully through the room, refilling water glasses while the meeting began. At first, the conversation remained polite, almost ceremonial. Trade agreements, shipping routes, investment numbers. But beneath the polished language, she sensed friction building slowly between the two sides. It lived inside the pauses. The tightened jaws, the way certain phrases were repeated too carefully. Then the translator made a mistake. Small, almost invisible, but Selena heard it instantly while pouring sparkling water beside one of the investors. A Korean phrase regarding operational authority had been softened incorrectly in English. The meaning changed completely. Instead of shared control, it implied surrender. One of the older businessmen stiffened immediately. Adrian's expression cooled by several degrees. The translator continued speaking, unaware of the tension rapidly spreading across the table. Selena lowered her eyes and stepped back silently, but her pulse had already quickened. She recognized the problem because she had seen similar misunderstandings before. Language could wound people more efficiently than weapons ever could. Another sentence followed, another mistranslation. This time the investor across from Adrian answered sharply in Korean. "Does he think we are employees?" The translator hesitated. Sweat appeared near his collar. Adrian's fingers tapped once against the table. Slow, dangerous. The room began tightening around that single mistake like a wire pulled too hard. Selena should have walked away. Servers were not supposed to involve themselves in conversations between men like these. But then she heard the translator choose another incorrect phrase. This one even worse. Several executives exchanged cold looks instantly. Adrian leaned back slowly in his chair, eyes darkening with visible irritation. "Repeat what he actually said," one investor demanded. The translator froze. Silence swallowed the room. Rain hammered softly against the windows high above Manhattan while nobody moved. Selena stood near the wine cart, gripping the edge of a folded linen towel. Her instincts screamed at her to stay invisible. Invisible meant safe. Invisible meant survival. But she also knew exactly what was happening now. Pride, misunderstanding, humiliation, all escalating through language no one fully controlled anymore. Adrian's voice finally cut through the silence in Korean. "If communication is becoming difficult," he said coldly, "perhaps this meeting should end." One of the older businessmen pushed back slightly from the table, insult flashing openly across his face. The translator looked seconds away from collapsing completely. Selena closed her eyes briefly. Then she heard the investor mutter one quiet sentence under his breath in Korean. This partnership was a mistake. Adrian heard it too, and the moment their eyes lifted at the same time across the room, Selena realized the entire night was about to change. The silence inside the East Room became unbearable after the investor's final sentence. Nobody reached for their drinks anymore. Nobody pretended this was still a polite business dinner. The translator sat frozen beside the leather portfolio, his hands trembling slightly above the table while rain crawled down the enormous windows behind Adrian Volkov like dark veins across glass. One misunderstanding had become three. Three had become insult. An insult, Selena Brooks understood better than most people in that room, could destroy partnerships faster than greed ever could. Adrian remained seated at the head of the table, one hand resting near his untouched bourbon, his expression controlled enough to frighten everyone watching him. The older Korean investor across from him adjusted his cufflinks sharply before speaking again in Korean. "We traveled 6,000 miles for respect, not surrender." The translator swallowed hard before attempting another explanation in English, but Selena already knew it would only make things worse. She recognized the panic in his voice. Panic distorted language. Distorted language created humiliation, and humiliation was already poisoning the room. Selena stood motionless near the wine cart for 2 long seconds while her heartbeat echoed against her ribs. Invisible. Stay invisible. That rule had protected her for years. But then Adrian spoke quietly in Korean without looking at her. "If someone in this room understands what is happening," he said coldly, "now would be an excellent time to prove it." Several heads turned towards Selena immediately. The translator looked almost offended by the implication, but Adrian's eyes never left the rain beyond the windows. He already knew. Selena inhaled slowly before stepping forward into the center of the room. The soft sound of her heels against marble seemed impossibly loud in the silence. One executive looked openly confused, watching a waitress approach an international negotiation table. Another appeared irritated by it. Selena stopped beside the translator and spoke, carefully in Korean toward the older investor. "Sir, the intended meaning was partnership through operational coordination, not submission of authority." The investor's hardened expression shifted slightly. Selena continued calmly. The English phrasing failed to carry the hierarchy implications correctly. Mr. Volkov was attempting to offer mutual strategic control. The room became still again, but this silence felt different now. Listening instead of hostile. The investor responded sharply in Korean, testing her. Then why did the translator repeatedly imply concession? Selena answered with complete composure. "Because some business terminology does not survive direct translation without cultural context." One of the executives blinked slowly, clearly lost already. Selena turned toward Adrian briefly. "In Korean corporate culture," she explained in English, "certain words connected to leadership carry emotional weight tied to family hierarchy and historical class structure. Literal translation changes the emotional meaning entirely." Adrian watched her carefully, unreadable now. Selena shifted back toward the investors and continued in flawless Korean. Mr. Volkov understands your concern. He also believes respect should remain equal between both parties. The older businessman studied her for several long seconds before finally leaning back into his chair. The tension around the table loosened almost immediately. Another investor nodded slowly. Someone exhaled quietly. Even the translator looked relieved despite the humiliation coloring his face. Adrian finally lifted his bourbon glass, though his attention remained fixed on Selena. "Continue," he said softly. Selena translated the next several exchanges herself with calm precision, carrying not just words but tone, pride, intention. Every sentence landed correctly now. Every pause made sense. And slowly, the fractured meeting began repairing itself around her voice. 20 minutes later, one of the Korean investors gave a respectful nod towards Selena before signing the preliminary agreement papers. "You should not be serving drinks," he told her sincerely in Korean. Selena lowered her eyes politely. "Sometimes life has different plans." Adrian said nothing, but as the agreement folders closed and the room finally relaxed, every person at that table understood the truth. The waitress they had nearly ignored at the beginning of the night had just saved a multi-million-dollar partnership without ever raising her voice once. The atmosphere inside Hanseo Tower changed completely after the contracts were signed. Earlier that night, the executives had looked through Selena Brooks as if she were part of the furniture, another invisible worker carrying glasses through rooms built for wealthy people. Now those same men watched her with careful respect whenever she crossed the floor. Even the restaurant manager spoke differently to her, his voice softer, almost nervous. Selena noticed all of it and reacted to none of it. She simply continued clearing plates beneath the warm amber lighting while rain whispered against the windows overlooking Manhattan. Adrian Volkov remained seated long after the investors left the East Room. The signed agreement folder rested near his hand untouched while low jazz drifted through the nearly empty restaurant. Most of the security team had moved downstairs already, but Adrian stayed where he was, watching Selena quietly as she organized wine glasses behind the service station. The translator from earlier avoided looking at her entirely before finally leaving with his briefcase clutched tightly against his chest. Shame followed him out of the room like a shadow. Adrian understood that feeling better than most people realized. "You made him look incompetent," one of Adrian's associates muttered while adjusting his suit jacket. Selena glanced up briefly. "No," she answered calmly. "His fear did that." The associate fell silent immediately. Adrian looked down into his bourbon glass, hiding the faintest reaction. That woman had a terrifying habit of speaking truth without decoration. After another few minutes, Adrian finally stood and crossed the room slowly. The city lights reflected across the dark fabric of his tailored coat, while employees instinctively moved aside for him without being asked. Selena remained near the service station, folding white linen cloths with precise movements. "Come with me," Adrian said quietly. Several staff members looked startled immediately, but Selena only nodded once before following him toward the quieter lounge area overlooking the rain-soaked skyline. The room there was dimmer, softer, insulated from the noise of the restaurant. Adrian loosened his cufflinks slowly before speaking again. "You embarrass me tonight," he said. Selena met his gaze calmly. "No, sir. I corrected a misunderstanding." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Most people would have used that moment to humiliate me after earlier. Selena looked toward the glass windows where water slid endlessly against Manhattan's lights. "Humiliation does not impress me anymore." Something about the way she said it made Adrian pause. Not bitterness. Exhaustion. He realized suddenly that Selena Brooks sounded like someone who had survived years of being underestimated long before she ever walked into this building. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a slim black folder. "I had someone look into your background after dinner started," he admitted. Selena did not appear surprised. "Of course you did." Adrian opened the folder slowly. "Academic records." Language certifications. Scholarship offers from international universities. Awards in comparative linguistics. The pages painted the life of someone brilliant enough to stand in rooms far more prestigious than this restaurant. Then the records stopped abruptly 6 years earlier. No graduate program. No international career. Nothing except hourly jobs scattered across New York City. Adrian looked up at her carefully. You turned down a fellowship in Geneva. Selena remained silent. Full scholarship, Adrian continued quietly. One of the best language programs in the world. A faint sadness crossed her face before disappearing again. My mother got sick. Adrian said nothing. There was nobody else to take care of her, Selena added softly. Medical bills do not pause because someone has potential. The rain outside seemed louder suddenly. Adrian lowered the folder slowly, his chest tightening in a way he did not expect. All night he had searched for arrogance inside her intelligence. But there was none. Selena Brooks had once possessed every opportunity powerful people respected, and life had taken them from her quietly while the world kept moving. Yet somehow she still carried herself with more dignity than most millionaires Adrian knew. And for the first time in years, the Korean Mafia boss felt genuinely ashamed of the way he had looked at someone. By 2:30 in the morning, Hanseo Tower had become almost completely silent. The investors were gone. The security teams had disappeared downstairs. Even the restaurant staff had finished cleaning and clocked out one by one beneath the fading gold lights of the empty dining floor. Rain still drifted softly across Manhattan outside the enormous windows, turning the city into a blur of silver reflections and distant headlights. Selena Brooks stood alone near the coat station, folding her apron carefully in her bag, her shoulders finally heavy now that nobody was watching her anymore. The adrenaline from the night had faded, leaving behind only exhaustion. She was reaching for her umbrella when Adrian Volkov appeared quietly near the entrance lounge, his dark overcoat hanging open slightly over the charcoal suit he still had not bothered changing out of. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them no longer felt hostile, only honest. Adrian glanced toward the rain beyond the glass doors before speaking in Korean again, though this time his voice carried none of the sharp amusement from earlier that evening. You should not take the subway alone this late. Selena looked at him carefully. I have managed before. Adrian gave the faintest shake of his head. That was before half the people in this building realized you were smarter than they are. A tired smile touched Selena's face despite herself. Adrian studied her quietly for another second before saying the words she never expected to hear from someone like him. I owe you an apology. The rain outside seemed to soften around the silence that followed. Selena stared at him briefly, almost as if she thought she had misunderstood the language itself. Adrian continued before she could answer. When you walked into that room tonight, I saw a waitress. I saw someone easy to underestimate. His jaw tightened slightly. That says more about me than it ever did about you. Selena lowered her eyes for a moment, fingers tightening softly around the strap of her bag. Adrian Volkov was not a man known for regret. Men like him built entire lives around never admitting fault. Yet here he stood near an empty Manhattan restaurant at almost 3 in the morning, apologizing to a woman he had tried to humiliate only hours earlier. You used language like a weapon, Selena said quietly. Adrian exhaled slowly. Yes. She looked toward the city lights beyond the rain-covered glass. I learned a long time ago that surviving people like that meant understanding every weapon in the room. Adrian went silent, because suddenly he understood something he had missed all night. Selena Brooks had not learned languages for prestige. She had learned them to survive humiliation, to navigate rooms where powerful people decided who deserved respect and who did not. Every word she spoke had been earned through struggle none of the executives upstairs would ever understand. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and removed a black business card embossed with silver lettering before offering it to her. Selena hesitated before taking it carefully. If you ever decide you are tired of serving people who underestimate you, Adrian said softly, call me. Selena glanced down at the card, then back at him. And do what exactly? For the first time all night, Adrian smiled without calculation. Without power. Without performance. Anything you want. The words settled quietly between them, while rain tapped gently against the glass walls of Hansio Tower. Selena slipped the card into her bag without answering. Then she opened her umbrella and stepped toward the elevator. Adrian remained standing alone near the entrance as the elevator doors slowly closed around her reflection. And somewhere between the silence, the rain, and the empty skyline of Manhattan, the Korean mafia boss finally understood something wealth and power had never taught him. Intelligence could command attention. Power could demand obedience. But dignity, real dignity, was the one thing no amount of money could buy once you lost it. And that night, in a room full of rich men who believed they understood status, a quiet black waitress had been the only person who never lost hers.